Today, I'm going to be taking you through your e-learning lesson, the different parts that you need to do, how to turn it in, and what the assignment entails. After you're done with the brief introduction, which should last about 5 minutes, you are welcome to turn off this video and read on your own and take notes on your own. However, if you would prefer that I read to you, then you can keep watching the video and pause only when you want to take notes. So, this is a lesson about reductive carving. This is the lesson that we're currently working on in class, and it just enriches that lesson by looking at a famous person known for doing this type of carving, Michelangelo. So right here it says directions, part 1. Well, if it says part 1, chances are there's more than one part. Okay, so part 1, read the biography. That's this one, Michelangelo. Have a piece of paper with a pencil or a pen. Write down 2 important things you learned about Michelangelo from the text. In our school, we're working on writing and we're working on gathering information. So we're going to be gathering information from this text. So over here, you should have a piece of paper. Up at the top, please go ahead and write your name and your class code. Likely it's W4. And you're taking notes over Michelangelo, the text. Now, it did say there's more than one part likely. So here's part 1, and I know that I need at least 2 pieces of information that I learned about Michelangelo. So I'm getting this piece of paper ready before I write. However, seeing that it said part 1 means that there's likely more than one part. So I'm going to scroll through until I find the next green part. So I'm scrolling through. This is the text I know I'm going to read. Oh, green part. Directions, part 2. Draw a line under your Michelangelo notes. Now watch one of the reductive carving videos below. List what video you watched and what you learned from it. So it did say to draw a line underneath my Michelangelo notes. This is part 2, so I'm going to list what video I watched and something I learned. Looking at the videos, it looks like I have 3 choices. You only have to watch one of these. So I can watch something on ice carving, I can watch something on wood carving, or butter carving. So I'm going to choose one of these videos, watch it, and write down something I learned. Now, I don't know if I'm done after this, so I'm going to scroll until I see another green. Whoop, there's my green. Directions, part 3. Turn in your work. Use your iPad to take a picture of your notes, open Canvas, and send the photo of the notes as an attachment to a Canvas message to Mrs. Nicholson. So when I'm all done, I'm going to take a picture, and I'm going to send that to Mrs. Nicholson. So those are your 3 things today. Looks like you're going to be reading about Michelangelo and writing down some information. The second part of gathering information is you're going to watch one of these videos about reductive carving and write down information. And then the third part is you're going to send it in. So at this point, if you understand what you're supposed to do and you want to read it on your own, then you go ahead and stop this video. However, if you would like me to read the text to you, then you can keep going. And here we are at the start. Okay, this is the overview. Michelangelo did Lavocchio Bernardi Simoni, what a name, born 1475, died 1564, so about 500 years ago, known as Michelangelo, was an Italian sculptor, poet, painter, and architect. Along with Leonardo da Vinci, he is often called a Renaissance man, which means he had a great talent in many areas. Remember, any part during this video, you just pause, write down the information. So maybe you want to say he was an Italian sculptor, poet, painter, architect, and then you can unpause the video and keep reading with me. So here's a picture of Italy, the boot. And this is a self-portrait, so he drew this of himself. It's said that he got into a fist fight with a fellow artist and it broke his nose. I thought that was kind of funny. Some of Michelangelo's works are among the most famous that have ever been made. They include two very famous marble statues, the Pietà and David. His most famous paintings are the Sistine Chapel ceiling and the Last Judgment. His most famous work of architecture is the dome in St. Peter's Basilica, which is a fancy church. A lot is known about Michelangelo's life because he left many letters, poems, and journals. Because he was so famous, he became the very first artist to have his biography, the story of his life, published while he was still alive. He was sometimes called Il Divino, the Divine One. Other artists said he had terribilità. His works were so grand and full of strong emotion, they were scary. So remember to pause if there's something important in that text that you want to write down. Here is his childhood. I thought this was so interesting. Michelangelo was born in Italy, but when Michelangelo was a baby, he was sick a lot and his parents could not take care of him. So he was sent to live on a small farm with a stonecutter and his wife. The stonecutter worked at a marble quarry owned by Michelangelo's father. Many years later, Michelangelo said that the two things that had helped him to be a good artist were being born in Italy, which was the land of great art, and being raised by a man who taught him how to carve. And a lot of times people do studies where they talk about, is it somebody's nature or their nurture that turn them into a good person or turn them into a bad person? His nature is the way that he was born. He was born to a person who owned a marble quarry and a woman that we don't know nothing about. But he was nurtured, he was raised by a man who was a stonecutter. So would he have been a famous sculptor if he had not been adopted by a stone carver? We may never know. When he was an older child, about 7, his birth father brought him back to live with him and go to school. However, Michelangelo was not interested in school. He skipped it a lot just to draw. When he was 13, he became an apprentice, a helper to a famous painter. Michelangelo was able to learn the art of fresco painting. To paint frescoes, an artist covers a wall in wet plaster and then he adds paint colors to it. Then when the plaster dries, the paint becomes part of the plaster and it protects it. When Michelangelo was only 14, so like our 8th grade, he became a paid artist, which was highly unusual at the time for a child so young to be paid to do art. Working for the Medici. Medici is a famous Italian name. The richest, most powerful family in Florence were the Medici. They had an academy, so they had their own college, where some of the most famous artists, writers, and poets would meet to learn from each other. Michelangelo went to their school and then started working for them. One of his most famous sculptures at that time, or some of them, were of angels. So here you can see an angel, and he is famous for saying, "I saw the angel in the marble, and I carved until I set him free." It would be pretty impossible. You're like looking at a big old hunk of stone and looking at it from all directions and then able to say, oh my gosh, I see it. I see the figure trapped in there. I just have to cut this part and this part and this part until it's free. I don't have that talent, but Michelangelo did. Carving marble like Michelangelo. Michelangelo was a reductive sculptor. Think reductive, think reducing, taking away. He took blocks of marble and chipped away bits at a time to create a completed 3D sculpture. Reductive sculpting is a difficult process, as if you chip away too much, it can destroy the whole work. What most people create is additive sculpture. They add stuff together. They build up materials to create something new. Please click on this video link to see how Michelangelo worked. So you're going to click here I think it's about 3 minutes long, and you're going to see this video of how they took rocks out of this quarry in Italy and how Michelangelo set about making a sculpture. At this point, you definitely should pause your video until you're done watching that movie. So here are some of his early famous sculptures. This is called Bacchus. This is the Greek god, I believe, or Roman god. And this is the Pietà. The Pietà is crazy, crazy detailed. So this is a biblical story. A lot of stories back then, a lot of artwork was done for the churches. And so this is a story of Mary holding her son Jesus as he came off of the cross after death. And so this is all carved out of one single piece, one single hunk of stone. It's quite an amazing feat. Okay, people noticed right away how fantastic Michelangelo's work was. So this is starting when he was about 14 and moving on. He was called at that time, and is still called, the most famous sculptor of all time. That's amazing, like the best one who ever lived. This guy, Giorgio Vasari, wrote, "It is a miracle that a shapeless block of stone could have been carved away to make something so perfect that even nature could hardly have made it better using real human flesh." And then Michelangelo says this, "If people knew how hard I worked to get my mastery, it wouldn't seem so wonderful at all." Meaning that this is not easy. This is not easy for anyone. And they look at this and go, oh my gosh, it's fabulous. But it takes a lot of hard work. So here's one of his most famous. This is the statue of David. Now I didn't show you all of David because, like most biblical imagery at that time, they're naked. Okay, so David is naked. A lot of these angels are naked. We'll see his paintings a little later. They're naked too. So here we can see the top of David. In 1501, Michelangelo began to carve his most famous statue, David. This is the young hero from the Bible story, David and Goliath. It took him 3 years to complete. The statue shows the young man just pausing for a moment and looking with fierce eyes at the huge soldier Goliath that he is about to kill. The statue is 17 feet tall. That's like a 2-story building. It was placed in the piazza, a public square. Now it is in an academia museum, and a copy stands in the piazza. People still go to great distances to see the statue that he made. So remember, you should be pausing this video as you go and writing down important facts on this piece of paper. The Sistine Chapel ceiling. So up to this point, he's done a little bit of painting, but he really has excelled as a sculptor. And people say, oh my gosh, he's the best to have ever lived. So that's really his jam. But we are about to see some questions. Michelangelo made many sculptures for the Medici family. He got more and more famous, and eventually he started working for the Pope. The Pope is the head of the Catholic Church, of all the Catholic churches put together. Working for the Pope would be like working for the President of the United States, or something bigger. It's like a huge deal. In 1505, Michelangelo was invited to Rome by the Pope. He wanted Michelangelo to design a grand tomb full of sculptures like this one. Michelangelo started to work. He made a magnificent statue of Moses, that's this one. But this grand tomb was not to be finished. The Pope changed his mind and had an idea for another work. A Sistine Chapel, this is the church, the Sistine Chapel was brand new at that time. It had its walls painted by some famous artists from Florence, and the Pope decided that Michelangelo should paint the ceiling of this church. Now this church is many, many, many stories tall. It would not have been easy, and Michelangelo was a sculptor. He's not a painter. Michelangelo did not want to do this. He said he's not a painter. but the Pope bullied Michelangelo until he agreed to do it. He told the Pope he would do it for God, and that he would do it only if the Pope let him paint it in his own way. The chapel was long and wide. Michelangelo painted scenes from the Bible on the ceiling. He started painting by showing God giving life to Adam, and then showed most of the other Bible stories too. Painting was much harder for Michelangelo than sculpting, and I think for most people it's the other way around. So here's just a cropped in view of God reaching out and giving life to Adam. Michelangelo says during that time, "A man paints with his brains, not with his hands." So it's like hard work again, a lot of thinking, a lot of hard work. So obviously this is a very, very tiny picture, and right here, that's where the two hands are touching. But all around, these are all stories of the Bible. Stories about humans and angels, and then people's demise finally, or the downfall of man. All kinds of things going on. And it took him years to paint this. And he was not happy about it. He wanted to be sculpting. This is the Last Judgment. Remember to be pausing as you go to take notes. So this is the work. A different pope, after Michelangelo was all done, okay, that pope died, and a new pope came into power. And he called Michelangelo back to the Sistine Chapel to paint the wall behind the altar with a huge scene called the Last Judgment. At the center, it shows Jesus surrounded by the saints, sitting in judgment over the people of the earth. To the left, people are rising from their graves, and many are welcomed into heaven. To the right, other people are being sent to hell, where they're dragged down by demons. It is a huge painting with many figures on it. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I would encourage you to look at it for a minute. The problem, though, like Adam and Eve on the ceiling, all of the figures were shown naked. Some of the leaders in the church said that it was wicked to paint people in the church with no clothes on. There was a long argument about this because people said that God had created everyone naked, so clothes were not needed in heaven. After Michelangelo's death, another artist was called in to paint drapes over the figures, and for the rest of his life, that man was known as the painter of pants. And here's his last work. This is St. Peter's Basilica. So we saw Michelangelo as a sculptor, we saw him as a painter, and here's him as an architect. When Michelangelo was in his 70s, he was given one of his most important jobs. The old St. Peter's Basilica is just a fancy church, was being redesigned. Michelangelo designed this huge dome, taller than any other dome in the world, and it's really renowned as a symbol of Christianity all across the world, is this dome. When Michelangelo died, he was a very famous artist, and here's his tomb. On his tomb sits three figures, mourning figures, who symbolize architecture, painting, and sculpture. What a beautiful tomb. So at this point, make sure you've taken some notes and you're writing those down here. At least 2 things that you learned from this video. Then remember, the next step is you're going to watch only one of these: ice carving, wood carving, or butter carving. They're all reductive, and take notes. And then the third part is to turn in your work. Use your iPad to take a picture of your notes and send it to me as an attachment to a Canvas message.